Good morning and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the business value of computational design and also generative design for executives. It's a pretty lofty title, right? So how many of you in here are like a CIO, CTO, that kind of persona? Okay. How many of you have opened Dynamo? Okay. How many of you have done Project Fractal? Who's gotten into Project Refinery Beta? Okay, good, good. We have a good mix of people. Just to let you know a little bit about myself, I frequently forget to tell people how I got here. So for those of you who don't know me, it seems like possibly many of you in this room, I don't think I've met many of you before, I am the industry outcomes lead for building design. I just recently moved from business strategy and marketing, where I was the architecture technical evangelist, and now moving into a more strategic role that's going to help enable all of you to adopt our technology better and achieve better outcomes for your customers and for your buildings. So places that I've worked at CBT Architects. Anyone familiar with that in the Boston area? Okay, one person, cool, hey. I've also worked at Mulvaney G2 Architects and Choico Business Associates. I've done healthcare, I've done retail, I've done multifamily development, also some urban planning. I've had a weird life. I went to a classical exam school, started out as an artist, went to RISD, wanted to do fine art. Then I started realizing like, oh, I'm just covered in charcoal all the time. This is ruining my business clothes. So I also started doing a lot of computer-aided design back at RISD, which was kind of also a weird thing to be doing at RISD, and then I'd sneak over Brown and talk to people in the computer science department. So while I was there, I was like trying to straddle all worlds, see all things. I eventually ended up with a Bachelor of Interior Architecture, and then working in healthcare, and then also a Master of Architecture with a concentration in real estate development. So just so you know where I'm coming from, I have a very broad background, and I like to think about the big picture and see things in a more strategic way, rather than just the little application here and there. So just so you guys know, this really wasn't developed in an island. There were a lot of people who helped to put together the content in here and the ideas in here. I don't know if you're familiar with any of these people, but this is kind of like the who's who of building design strategy at Autodesk. So if you bump into any of them, for example at Dyna Lightning on Wednesday night, I would definitely talk to them about what you learned in this course, give them your thoughts and ideas about what's happening in the industry, and help us create a great feedback loop. Okay, so this is what you got when you were signing up. This is why you signed up and why you want to be here. You want to get a complete understanding of computational and generative design. You want to learn how to compellingly sell people on this. Like maybe you love using Dynamo every day, but you don't have quite the support you'd like in your current office or your current projects for this. Or maybe you're an IT director who needs to move people into the future of design technology, but maybe there are some principals who aren't quite on board with that and they're not sure why would they bother adopting this, right? You also want to learn how to implement things in a project, and also the worksheets. I didn't upload a handout for this class. I will. I just got a new job. I'm working on it. So when this is over, I'll make sure to send out an email to everyone who's attended to give you takeaways, handouts, and more information for all of you. All right. So you're all aware that Autodesk's vision is to help people imagine, design, and create a better world. This is a big deal. Right now, we're facing really strange historic climate events very frequently. We have huge population growth, and we have a lot of needs for buildings to be developed and to be developed better. I just want to kind of take a step back. Like I said, big picture person. We're going to walk through the big picture here. So how are we getting from ideas to reality? I would guess, and maybe we'll take a poll on this, when you go to your office and someone decides to start designing a building, someone sits down with a piece of paper, sketches something out, sketches something else out, thinks about it, shows it to somebody. How many people generally start thinking about design projects with a sketch? Oh, that's like a lot of people. It's most people. And that's really effective because it gets the idea that you have out of your head pretty much as quickly as possible. And it's a great tool. In history, we've always been sketching. We've always been putting our ideas out there. We've started out drawing manually, sketching into the sand. Unfortunately, it wouldn't last very long. We also started out modeling, making giant models like Stonehenge or smaller models, maybe just along a hiking trail. We have an innovation of paper, which has brought us a long way from the days of the sand and the sketching. Now we're able to take our ideas mobily, we're able to take them off-site, and we're able to actually do some kind of like tactile, mobile, manual modeling that we couldn't do previously. Thank goodness for chipboard, right? And then in history, we've had this computing innovation. And this is just sort of a different way to think about how you've been developing what you've been doing in life. So with this computing innovation, we're suddenly extending all of our drawing capabilities and our modeling capabilities. We can do digital models, we can do renderings. But the thing that's really interesting is even with these found materials, paper, and computing, is that the process is still very separate. One thing is not connected to another. And how many of you are doing manual models, digital models, and digital drawing right now? Come on, I know it's a lot of you. Okay. So the goal here really should be definitely to move to BIM, right? Because there are huge efficiency gains when you move to BIM. You have suddenly taken these really disparate and disconnected projects and products with data loss inherent in this system of development, and you're bringing them all together, right? And you're able to draw better, you draw more efficiently, draw less lines, do more calculated insights. It's a much better system, and I love to think of BIM as the single source of truth for ideas, right? So beyond BIM, we do want to think about this next generation of ideation evolution. You're probably going to all of your classes, and you're picking this up as you go along. I'm assuming somebody's seen Unity in the quad already. I'm assuming somebody's been able to maybe test Reflect if you go to the architecture quad. Maybe somebody's tried to design a doghouse with Revit and put it through Unity. That's one of the cool projects that we have set up for you guys, so definitely check that out. Other cool things that are going on are things with project delivery. So BIM 360, right? This is all enabled by these big cloud computing innovations. How many of you are using BIM 360 Design for project delivery? That's quite a few. That's great. Good. So that's like our one next evolution based on this cloud innovation. Then we have hardware and software innovation. So this is where we're getting into computational and generative design to be able to automate processes and to be able to generate options. And then finally, one thing I really like to think about lately is beyond these two things, what impact is artificial intelligence going to have on the future of design? I think that in the future, we're going to see the ability for artificial intelligence to crawl through project databases, assuming that we've been able to identify data properly such that it can identify data in databases. It'll be able to tell you, like, hey, here's 15 bathrooms you've designed in your last 15 projects. Let's figure out the best bathroom solution for this bathroom in the future. Maybe there'll be an opportunity for design assist in the future. So you start laying out a building and maybe the AI is telling you, hey, I think the best location for your fire escape is going to be here based on this analysis I've run on your last 15 projects, right? So the future of AI is going to sound a lot like predictive design. That's kind of an emerging term to keep in the back of your head as we're developing our architectural projects. The focus of this course is going to be on computational and generative design, but with a focus on what this means for business and why this matters for business. So just to kind of give you a product view of these things that I've been talking about in case somebody here has never worked in Revit, for example. Revit is our BIM tool, and you can see in this workflow, we're using Revit to create geometry and assign constraints, modify parameters, and document our ideas. It's a pretty straightforward process. What's really interesting about Revit and some recent developments in the product is we have things like global parameters, for example, that will allow you to create a very, very flexible modeling system within Revit. So you can have like high degrees of flexibility throughout your project lifecycle, which is quite nice. We also have computational design. So where this looks a little bit different than our traditional BIM process is we're actually, in this case, starting out maybe in Revit with a site or some sort of a location. We're generating geometry within Dynamo, which is kind of like an extension for Revit. And then we're integrating that geometry back into the BIM model. So for those of you who are in Revit and working, don't worry. Computational design's okay, and it's not going to push anyone out of any process by any means. It's very much an integrated way of working, and it's going to give you more time to work on other things. Generative design is really interesting. So I'm just going to go back for a second. You can see in the slide, right, we're generating and analyzing and evaluating. But we're really just automating the creation of the mask that we were able to manually create before with BIM, right? So BIM, we drew it. Computational design, we automated drawing it. Generative design is kind of interesting. So we're automating the creation of the model form and drawing. But on top of that, we're also able to generate options. And really, an insane amount of options. You can basically generate as many options as your computing processing power can handle, and that's quite a few. You can do more with generative design than you could ever do manually previously. So why is this important? We're going to switch a little bit into a business mindset right now. So the architects in the room, forgive me, I did make nice visuals. Hopefully this keeps you entertained. I want to talk a little bit about like a traditional project strategy, right? So in our traditional project strategy, we're identifying the project type, might be retail, might be a hotel. Then our typical process is usually iterative. So you can see in this little develop box, there's charretting, designing, critiquing, discovering, and constraining. And this kind of happens in cycles. You'll start out with like your first big charrette with your team, and then you'll go and have your review with your client, and then the client will be like, I don't like that, I do like that, and let's get a consultant on board, and the engineer will be like, oh, hey, I don't know about this system, let's try this thing. And it's kind of like an all over the place process, and you're getting a lot of the constraints downstream, which is not really that ideal for business efficiency. Just throwing that out there. And then at the end of this kind of limited charretting process, we're focused on just realizing a building, getting the construction documentation set out there, handing it off, making sure the contractor is building things properly, closing it out, doing the as-builts. Maybe we're doing a little bit of field management, but we're kind of hands-off at that point. It's a little bit, when you think about it, like the game Battleship. And this is a little bit of like a tongue-in-cheek thing, but you're probably reading this top thing. Combine strategy and luck in this exciting attempt at continuing your project or winning new work with your designs. I hope that makes everybody in the room go, oh, I don't know. I guess it's a little bit how we're doing it, and it makes me a little bit uncomfortable. When I read it, it definitely makes me a little bit uncomfortable. So we don't want to guess, and we do want to evolve from where we are. And right now, when I think about design, I'm thinking about kind of two flavors of it. I'm thinking about traditional design, where people are shredding, critiquing, and then I'm thinking about more contemporary design that has more of like an IPD process, where people are doing a lot of project delivery, like you guys in the room were telling me. And I'm sure anyone who's ever been to a business presentation on architecture has seen this curve. Who is this by? I heard McLeamy somewhere over here. All right, so we've got a McLeamy curve going on. The McLeamy curve, for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's pretty interesting. What it shows is what we're calling this traditional design workflow effort happening at its peak in construction documentation, and this contemporary effort happening earlier, since we have started implementing things like project delivery tools, BIM 360, BIM tools, Revit. It's also showing that the ability to impact a cost and functional capability with static models is like an exponential decay curve here. So you have some opportunity right at the beginning, but as you just keep constraining and constraining, and with less parametric flexibility, things get decided and they stay that way for the most part. It's also showing this cost of design changes increasing also exponentially as you get past bid and into CA and operations. As the building's actually being built, it's very expensive to make any sort of change to what's going on. So the takeaway here is like the opportunity for making changes in your designs is at the front end of the building design process, which is pretty important to keep in mind, considering our capabilities aren't really like letting us do that. This is the future of project strategy. And this is kind of a bold slide. I've never seen this before. I made it. So what I think the future of project strategy is going to look like is you're going to have someone up front identifying the project, but the development phase is going to be, instead of those 3 little circles, limitless amounts of circles. This is because in the future people will be using BIM, Revit, they'll be doing these parametric flexible models, and they'll be able to run studies later and later and later throughout the design process to be able to impact the design. And the reason that there's so many of these circles, where we only really saw like 3 earlier, I'm trying to make a point that when you're starting to integrate computational and generative design processes into your project strategy, you have the opportunity for so much more work to get done in this development phase of the project. Beyond realizing the building, when you start implementing these tools, there are new opportunities that open up because you're going to have more time away from really repetitive and tedious tasks to focus on other things. So you'll be able to curate building operations throughout the building life cycle. You'll be able to inform future projects, and you'll be able to grow the work that you do related to the typologies that you're currently working on. So I'm going to introduce this term, outcome-driven design. Outcome-driven design is going to be the next phase of project strategy for design. It's going to evolve on traditional and contemporary. It's going to integrate automation, computation, also analytical data. And again, it's going to expand on the outcomes for your projects. So when we think about the McLeamy curve, outcome-driven design is actually going to have a pretty big impact on our ability to impact cost and functional capabilities. You can see that I think the exponential curve is going to flip. I think we're going to have a lot more opportunity to make big, big changes in the design model all the way up until construction and bidding. And I also think in that operations phase, you can see that green line, there's a bigger opportunity for expanding into nurturing a relationship with the customer. And you can see also to the left where there's this little outcome-driven design guy working up there, the place where we're going to be putting in the most work in the future is going to be way up front. It's going to be having to do a lot with getting the data that we need to create the buildings from a very lateral and democratic approach. So you can see also there's opportunities once we start shifting our major work effort to the front part of our projects. There's going to be opportunities for better visualization, material studies, sustainability studies, and research and detailing. I think these are areas that will expand and that maybe won't be quite so automated. Surely we can develop databases, but I think to make really great decisions for sustainability, you really need people involved there. And then I want to talk a little bit about key components of outcome-driven design. So who has ever been locked in a room for a week at an offsite doing strategic planning? Okay, I'm seeing like a minimal amount of hands go up for that. And that's really interesting, and that's really good. Because people are asking, like, what is the future of the architecture profession? Especially with automation, and especially with computation and generating happening. If I'm not clicking and making walls and making masses, like, what am I going to be doing in the future, right? I think that the future holds great things for all of you. And I think that in the future, strategic planning is going to be so important to our design processes. And I also think when you have the full team brought in for strategic planning up front, you're going to have very, very different outcomes than what you have today. A typical process today is you'll have a principal meeting with a client, they'll figure out kind of what the project looks like, maybe a project architect will come in, maybe a project manager will come in and think about what's happening. And then that information might get disseminated to like the very small design team that starts to think about the project. Then maybe some consultants are brought in. Then maybe at the end things start going to the contractor and to the construction field. I think in the future with strategic planning, all of those people that I just spelled out are known at the beginning of the project. They're identified, they're brought on board, they're given a say. And I think that's going to be a radical mind shift in architecture in the future. When all of those people get a seat at the table up front, and they're all allowed to work together, to have a voice, to say what they need to make a successful project, that's going to make a big difference in the future of design. We're also going to have outcome-driven design. So an example of this would be, say you're, I don't know, working on a hotel, and you need to develop very specific unit mixes. In the beginning of your project, you're going to identify that. And you're going to identify any of the other possible parameters that you need to make this project successful. And then when you get into your computation and your generative design, you're going to take all of those things and you're going to like literally script out your project to meet those criteria. And then in a very ideal world, you'll actually be able to follow the project all the way through and be able to do metrics on the actual performance of the building. Then you will know, were you successful or not? Did your outcomes that you were predicting and modeling meet what's actually happening in that building or not? And then what opportunities are there from how the building's actually functioning to be able then to make an impact? Then there's this really interesting idea of parenthetical analysis. Who in here knows Zach Krohn? Okay, we've got like 2 or 3 people. So I was talking to Zach about this. I was like, Zach, in the future, there's going to be dashboards, and they're going to be big, and they're going to have a lot of things in them. And he's like, oh yeah, that's cool. I was just talking about that last week. I'm like, okay, cool. So I think when I say parenthetical analysis, I've gotten feedback like, oh, this is a lofty word, like what are you talking about with this? So I'll explain to you how I explained to Zach. It's the idea that right now, if you work in Insight, you get a dashboard, right? And it's like very related to Insight, and it's very related to those little specific things. Right now, if I develop a script in my computational graph, I can encode in all sorts of analytical things. Like if I make a building envelope, I can know what is the floor area ratio, what's the cost going to be, what are all these other things going to be for outcomes and analysis, right? So I have that dashboard over there. In BIM, I can get counts, I can assign cost parameters to elements, I can get some sense of analysis over there. For the executives in the room, think about what will parenthetical analysis look like for you, and what will it mean for your project. So as an architect and a designer and a person who likes to envision the future, I like to think it's like, you know, we're on the deck of some Star Trek ship, and there's your insight and your costs and all of your real estate stuff and like all of your other parameters and data that you'd possibly need. And that's exciting to me. And I think that another part of the future of architects is going to have to do with data analysis and visualization, being able to see it all together and make a really, really good analysis of what's going on in a holistic way. Integrated delivery, I think that we have a lot of great strides being made in bringing people together and giving access to data through sharing. I think, again, the push needs to be made, taking the people from downstream, bringing them upstream, and giving them a seat at the table. Finally, operational nurture. This is kind of a weird word. I first started hearing nurture at Autodesk all the time when I was hanging out with my customer success friends. And for them, it's so important to maintain strong relationships with clients and customers and to nurture that relationship and to make sure that people are successful. I think in the operational phase of a project, we as architects need to work to keep the relationship and to keep the data of the building as it's functioning through its life cycle, to be able to inform what we're really doing. I don't know that we have that full loop connection right now, and I think that's very important. So, in summary, why should you care about all of the stuff that I'm talking about really passionately about? Why is this a business opportunity? We have this problem. We have this problem of perception in the industry, and this cracks me up. People see us in different ways and from different perspectives, and we don't always have control over that. And I think what that means, actually, is we also have these salary problems. We have a problem where we're just not getting paid enough, guys. And people are not, seeing us as for all of the value and all of the things that we do. I don't know if anybody's read Architecture Design Data. Anybody? No? Okay. One person? Cool. This is a really good book. And it's a heavy read for the first 3 chapters. But gosh, if you get to the last 2 chapters, they're riveting. You're going to be on the edge of your seat. It's all about value and design, and it's a really great read. And I love that Phil Bernstein is very well articulated that, okay, we're a rare commodity if you look at us statistically. There's not a lot of us, but somehow, there's no clear tie between what we're offering and how we're being compensated. We make all the buildings, we make all of them. So really, there should be more correlation and more value. And on top of this, anyone in the industry right now is aware that our billing index is a little waffly, and it's a little bit stagnant. And we've had, some woes recently in August that the billing index is dipping, and this isn't good for our bottom line. The other thing to just kind of keep in the back of your head as you think about your value, in the big picture here, we are this tiny, tiny fraction of the overall cost of a project. It would mean actually so little in the full cost of the project to value us properly. And we also have this kind of crazy compensation system that we're working in, where the majority of projects are these lump sum fixed fee projects. And it's very difficult to negotiate up in those project types. And then beyond that, if you're not doing a lump sum fixed fee project, you have this time basis project, which if you mention to anybody, hey, how is it working hourly? You're going to get probably a fiery response from them saying, it's rough. I don't enjoy it. It's not my favorite thing. The other thing that's actually pretty interesting is with the majority of our buildings being designed in this lump sum system, there's really not a lot of incentive here for people to work. Our incentive is actually to spend less time and less effort on things. And for the client, they don't generally care about the process. Why would they care about the process? They just want it to get done on that amount of money that they're paying, right? So that's troubling. And on top of all of these things, our buildings aren't performing super well. We're making buildings, they're out there, but they're causing a little bit of trouble because we're not tying what we're doing into how these things are actually performing. But I'm pretty sure everyone in this room can agree that excellence in building design is really, really invaluable. And I also know that everyone in this room puts a crazy amount of work into everything that they do. I know that we're all notorious for spending all-nighters, and we love buildings, and we want to see things done well. We do a lot. When you go through and you think about the scope of services that we provide, they are so vast. It's insane. It's insane when you look at it. And beyond that, think of all of our consultants that we're working with too. The consultants are doing a lot, and we're helping all of this process go along? We should be getting paid as much as those lawyers. So I think that our problem has to do with process and perception. There was a really interesting quote I got from the first principal that I worked with at MG2 Architects, Alan Feltoon, and he always would say to me, you know, Emily, perception is reality. And that's very true. And we as an industry, and everyone in this room, we really need to work very hard on how we're perceived for the amount of value that we're providing. So what do? How do we fix this? Okay, I'm going to offer up some ideas. I think negotiation, good idea, really hard to do in practice. You're probably always going to have someone who is trying to underbid you for a project. If you try to negotiate up, there's like very, very, very small margins that you're ever going to be able to negotiate. So I don't know, which hill do you want to fight on? To me, negotiation's probably not the right hill right now, maybe later. I think efficiency and adding value are the two places where you all are going to be able to make big changes and really move the needle. Efficiency has to do with, you know, only doing what's necessary, understanding very clearly what's necessary, and really automating as much as possible. And then we get into adding value. So beyond automation, we have to show that we are adding value for the buildings that we are designing, beyond just making a building. So what if you could use this new project strategy of outcome-driven design to impact efficiency and value? This is a fun slide, and I feel a little bit like a weather reporter when I'm talking about it, you know. So there's a lot of words going on. I'll try to kind of walk through this. We have huge opportunities in each of these new phases of the future of project strategy to be able to either add value or increase efficiency. By adding in a strategic planning phase in the beginning, we're going to be able to add value. We're going to get more people on board from downstream. We're going to be able to identify exactly what needs to happen and execute very strategically. By integrating operational nurture at the end, you're going to be able to ensure customer success throughout the project and to the end. And how do we do this? We're going to have to be focusing on a series of new hires. So the future of business hires is going to be a little bit like design strategist, design technologist. Who here is a design technologist? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So when I was working in the architecture industry a couple of years ago, actually a couple, 7 years ago, I went in for a job and they wanted to call me a software specialist, like for architecture, and I was like, hey, what if we think about this a little bit differently? I think I can add a little bit more value than that. What if we call it a design technologist? The firm had never heard of that word before, but we went with it, and that was my title, and I was probably one of the earlier design technologists out there in the industry doing design technology, thinking about things more holistically. The future is integrated design technology teams in your firms and in your projects. You're also going to have a design analyst. Who has a design analyst that they work with currently? Not a hand in the room. Oh my God, that's remarkable. Think about it. It doesn't quite exist yet, but it should. Because there should be a person that is thinking about the entire outcome, metrics, and value of that design holistically as you're designing it and making sure that you're staying on track and telling your design technology and architecture teams, hey, we've got to make these changes here, there, and there because we're not quite hitting the marks. Think about the fact that that doesn't exist. It's kind of wild. So for integrated delivery, I think eventually there will be someone who's a point person on cloud delivery, and I think that at the end, a building design outcomes lead would be really helpful. Keep the relationship going. Don't stop it when the building's done. Keep it going. Keep adding value for your clients. Keep getting data on how the building's operating. Keep identifying opportunities for future work. So let's talk a little bit about this design technology team. When I worked in my team, it was part of a CIO, CTO, part of the organization. We didn't have all these people. We had two of these people. We had the design technologist and we had a BIM manager. And actually, it was mostly two people performing those two roles. Bringing computational and generative design into your business is going to open up new opportunities for new roles. You're going to see a dedicated design technologist that should be more of a generalist that looks at things very holistically, all of the technologies coming in, and gets a sense of what does what and why should we do something here, there, or the other thing. You'll have the BIM manager who's thinking more about Revit and everything that's going on in that landscape as far as standards and ensuring that they're rolled out across the company properly. Computational designer is going to be very focused on process automation and making sure that those scripts and graphs are able to be democratized across the firm. And your generative designer is going to be the person that thinks about where can we actually automate options for the things that we're working on. So if you have a company that doesn't have these 5 people and you're at an executive level, you need to be thinking ahead and thinking about how you can hire these people so that you're at the beginning of this wave into outcome-driven design. What these people should be doing is looking at the full scope of work for building design and all of the different capabilities that you can see listed underneath and thinking where can I find places and opportunities for efficiency in all of these different landscapes. So some places that we've actually already seen that are with doing view optimization and space planning, panel optimization, crane location optimization. There's a lot of work that's actually already being done in the industry across these phases to get things automated and optimized. Let's talk a little bit about computational design. For anyone who doesn't know, this is the logo for Dynamo for Revit. Dynamo is kind of an interesting product. It's open source. There's a standalone Dynamo Studio. There's an integrated Dynamo for Revit. And then if you're a Revit person that just really doesn't want to touch any of it, there's a thing called Dynamo Player, which your design technology team should be able to help implement these process automations into that player for you to be able to run them and have access to this design speed without having to write graphs or scripts or do anything like that. So let's take a look at the idea of automating building mass and cost. You can see some key outcomes here, and this is kind of an interesting thing to think about. You all should keep outcomes in the back of your head. If you want to show the value that you add, you have got to be marketing these outcomes. You have got to let people know what you're doing that is so important that the amount that someone pays for your projects should go up. So we're looking at reducing time to design development, increasing early stage design profit, and improving cash flow management. These are words that, as architects, it's not necessarily what we're thinking about when we are working on the little picks and clicks to make a building, but it's very important to show your value. So this is Dynamo for someone who hasn't seen the Dynamo user interface. There's these things, nodes which are wired together, and as they're wired together, you're able to do things like create geometric volumes, flex them. As you're flexing these things live, there's cost variables and parameters that can be built into your graph that can then give you any kind of analysis that you could possibly develop. One thing that's really funny about computational and generative design is people are like, well, what can I do with it? And it's really anything. And so it's kind of hard for people to get into it because it's just so wide open. Any problem that you can break down into a series of requirements and then work through in this Dynamo system, you can solve with it. One automation that's really effective is automating sheets. So I'm sure some of you have had to lay out views on sheets before, and it takes a really long time. Usually there's a cartoon set up front, and then you're maybe doing some data in Excel to get an idea of that cartoon set, and then you're probably manually entering things inside your Revit application. But with Dynamo, you can take 39 views in your project browser and immediately create all of the sheets that are necessary for your project and place views. And we're even getting to a point where people now are using bin packing algorithms to be able to lay out multiple views in really cool ways within the box perimeter of the sheet. So there's just a lot of technological development that is going into these processes. This is super cool. Does anyone in here know Jacob Small? No? 1, 2? Gosh, you guys, you've got to meet him. He's the best. He's going to be at the Dynamo Slam, and he and I are emceeing that event, and that is tomorrow night, I think at 6. So come downstairs and see us and meet him because he's amazing. He's made this graph where you're able to place 8,388 bricks on a curved wall. It's unbelievable. Like, who could possibly actually place those physically? Like, I don't even think I could if I wanted to once. And think of how long it would take, and how tedious it would be, and how many rotations you'd have to do. I get tired thinking about it. So this is super cool, right? It's just you have this curvy wall form, you're able to place these things, you're able to think about optimizing the location of control joint sequencing. You can make sure that this is laid out properly or not ahead of time instead of waiting to see and talk to a builder. You can give them very accurate instructions and have a more integrated process. So that's exciting. Utility routing, that's another really, really cool development that's come out lately. I don't know if has anyone ever automated utility routing? One person, okay, cool. So yeah, the idea of being able to take utilities, this is baked into Revit. It can be also utilized in Civil 3D because now we're starting to get expanded Dynamo opportunities. And as you're updating the terrain, it's going to update the structure that supports all of the terrain lines and then informs the routing of the utility. It's also possible now to automate furniture placement. I don't know who's aware of this trend. What is the next big building trend for building design? What typology? No? Starts with M, rhymes with multifamily development. Multifamily development. So if you do multifamily development, that's awesome. Things are looking good for you in the future. And you should really think about utilizing Dynamo to be able to place all of your furniture and all of your unit layouts automatically. You can see in this instance, some room information is being entered into the Dynamo graph for where you're copying elements from. And then all of the furniture within that room is actually being placed in all different parts of the project. So on the right-hand side, there's a 3D view. On the left-hand side, there's also a 3D view. You'll see in a moment that when the graph is run and the furniture is selected, all of the furniture then gets automatically populated throughout all of the levels and into all of the similar room types of the building, which is pretty special and magical if you've ever had to lay them out one by one. We'll give this 1 second. It's running now, and there it is. All the furniture, it's there. Pretty cool. And if you're more of the engineering type, we're doing a lot with the ability to automate the placement of steel and reduce waste for materials, which is really exciting. Again, a way that we're not only increasing efficiency, but also adding value by reducing waste, right? So think about where you can do the play of both things together and market that. And for the sake of time, I think I'm going to skip through this video because I want to make sure that we get into the end of the presentation. There's a lot of information here, so I will, like I said, send follow-up information for you all, and if you're following me on Twitter, I will be posting a lot of these kind of ideas there too. So generative design is really more about design optimization. What we were looking at previously was process automation, so just making stuff happen faster. But now we're thinking about making things happen in a more refined way, and in the best way possible. I don't know if anyone has seen this Van Wijnen project. It's been trotted around quite a bit by Autodesk and our teams. It's pretty cool though. So Van Wijnen is in the Netherlands, and they were having a lot of trouble sustaining a profit. They were going after like a 2% profit margin when they were trying to design these layouts for their urban neighborhoods and struggling there. So you can see that they developed all of these different parameters that they wanted to optimize for, like backyard size, views, solar gain, cost, et cetera. And they're able to work out an algorithm that not only automates the creation of these things, but also optimizes for the values as they're working with one another. So that's one example of optimization. We also have Daiwa House. This is, again, pretty good example of showing multi-objective optimization. This time we're trying to place buildings in the most efficient way on the site that they're working with. And let's see, optimizing a building position based on solar incidence and the glazing requirements of the building. So in this case, we're utilizing, again, Dynamo Project Refinery. We're running these options within Refinery, and Refinery gives you the tools to be able to narrow down to very specific requirements within this graph that you're seeing to be able to identify the best possible option. We're also able to optimize the building program. So this was actually a cool video that you will see on main stage that's showing the idea of integrating generative design into the UI so that in the future people may not even need to get into Dynamo to run these things, because currently if you're running it, you're going from Dynamo to Project Refinery, but in the future, wouldn't it be great if, just like Dynamo Player, we were able to have that accessibility for people where they're able to just run these studies without all of the back end. And this is, again, bringing in the importance of that design technology team. You need a strong team that's going to help you on the back end and make it accessible on the front end. This is a project that everybody's probably seen 1,000 times, right? The Mars office in Toronto, Autodesk, the living team, designed this. And I think why I put this in here isn't because I want to show it to you for the 10,000th time, but what I want to convey is, I don't know, 4 years ago, I was at AU, and I was a design technologist in an architecture firm, and I walked up to this exhibit, and I saw all these little boxes moving, and I was like, what is this? And it's just taken me on this incredible, crazy journey into Autodesk as a premium support specialist, specializing in generative design and BIM, and as an architecture technical evangelist, getting in deep with the product teams and getting their information out to you. And also now in this industry outcomes role, this stuff is life-changing. It really is. And it should really impact everything about how you design buildings. So I'm going to skip through some other things here because I want to be able to, let's look at the parking layout. It's pretty cool. Dieter Vermeulen, I don't know if you all know Dieter Vermeulen. He's really, really talented computational designer. He's figured out a way recently to be able to automate parking layouts. So if anybody's ever worked in a retail area, maybe on something like a Walmart or Costco, and you're in the early stage real estate development portion of the project, they're going to ask you to lay out a parking lot every single time you work on one of these buildings. And these buildings pop up pretty frequently for these big box companies. This kind of a graph would let you go in, select the big picture form, and just completely automate the parking space layouts. So think about all of the different parts of your design process that this can touch. So moving into kind of the last part of this talk that I want to convey to you all. Outcomes really matter. They really matter. They matter for your bottom line. They matter for the paycheck that you take home. They matter for the future of our planet. We need to build better buildings, desperately. I think the message I want you to take away from this talk is think about this strategy. Think about the roles that you've never heard of today. And think about maybe what could my future look like considering all of this. Do I maybe want to think a little bit more about design data analytics and visualization? Should I think a little bit more about strategic planning? Or should I think a little bit more about customer success? And how can I integrate those future possibilities into my current role? If you're at an executive level, I think where you want to start in redefining your project strategy is reviewing your project typologies, reviewing your staff, your processes, and training up. Like I was just saying, we need to consider training up for strategic planning, for coding, for data analysis, maybe integrating manufacturing understanding into the architectural process, and customer success. These are all new arenas that we are moving into as architects so that we can add value and be relevant. As far as testing, this is one of the important parts of computational and generative design for a business person. You've got to find the right project, the right client, and the right teams all at the right time, which is tough. You need a client who's going to care enough to be flexible and show up and come to planning meetings and give you the data you need up front to make the best possible building for them. In terms of implementing computational and generative design in projects, this is like a workflow that I would recommend to you all, where again, you're getting the right client, getting the project, reviewing processes, developing processes. I can send this all out as a handout. It's a lot to go through, but just generally, you need to rethink the big picture of how you're running your projects. This is interesting. Lily Smith, who's the product owner for Project Refinery, was like, you should really put this into this presentation because it's also important to think about making selections based on the level of importance and also the level of difficulty to execute. And I was trying to actually take some of our projects and put it into these squares. I could not put a project in the easy wins square, which was like a weird problem to have, because every generative design study that I was looking at, I was like, okay, difficulty, it's usually on the higher end right now, and importance, it's usually extremely important. So I think where the field is in this graph right now is usually somewhere between luxuries investments and high return on investment. You're not necessarily going to get easy wins when you start implementing this. It's a high upfront investment. It is. It's an investment in people. It's an investment in reworking your process. So just keep that in mind. And this is the other thing that I think about all the time. And I will tell you this personal anecdote. When I got married, the first thing I did was ask my husband, like, hey, what are your values? And he was like, it was just crickets. It was crickets for weeks. He couldn't tell me. And it was like a conversation that was just like, he was not into having it. It is a hard conversation to have. If I just said to like you, what are your values? You're going to be like, what? I don't know. Why are you asking me? That's a weird question, right? So something to think about. We have to figure out a way to have conversations about our values, because if we can't figure that out, we can't design computationally or generatively. You've got to know that up front, and you've got to be able to articulate it. It's tricky. Here's like a sampling of values that I was thinking about recently related to design. Someone might really care about sustainability, or somebody might really care about expression, or maybe maximizing FAR, or maybe it's combinations of these things, right? Maybe it's the whole project's about iconography and expression, and it's definitely not about maxing the FAR, you know? Or maybe it's a bunch of these things that all come together and play nicely that produce something like a little academic building. Or maybe you get that client who's like, I want to preserve everything exactly the way it is, but I want to be innovative. And then what do you do? So there's a people problem in all of this to think about. You have to be able to manage people and values earlier in the design and get them clarified. Finally, the interesting thing is when you get those values, it does turn into metrics, and it does turn into elements within your design, and it does really impact the entire design process. So I know I sound crazy when I'm like, what are your values? But it's important, and it's important to be able to have that conversation. Values becoming goals for your project, this is what that looks like. And skipping ahead a little bit, because I think, what do we have, 5 minutes left? Is that right? Good. I want to just give you some kind of resources, think about Dynamo in the future. And Dynamo is cool, it's expanding rapidly, and it's being supported in all of these different products. So Dynamo is flexible, it's going to help you have a more common data environment, and it's going to keep you on the cutting edge of design, process, and strategy. Here's some additional resources. I'll send this out to email for anyone who showed up. And also, there's things like the Dynamo user groups across the world that I would highly recommend you just pop in and listen to what people are up to, because you'll get a really good sense of, in the computational design community, what are the trends, what are people automating, what are people optimizing, and where do I need to be? Where do I need to position my company to get the most out of the future of design? We also have things like design residencies, which are kind of cool. So if you want to get into computational and generative, you can actually go and do a residency and go through a hackathon and like deeply embed yourself in the process to get a nicer understanding of that. This is a very, very long checklist. And again, don't expect you all to read through it, but let it be known I've been thinking about this. And I want to be able to help you all make buildings better and more efficiently. So I'll send this as a follow-up for you. At this point, I see that it's 1:11 p.m. There's so many things you can do with process automation. There's so many things that you can do with generative design. And I just want you to keep these things in mind, right? Like, these are the conclusions you should take away from today. Computational and generative design are influencing a whole new strategy for the industry. And the new strategy is called outcome-driven design. If you had to tell somebody at your firm what was one of the bigger things you took away from this entire experience, ask them if they've heard about outcome-driven design, and ask them what they think it means. And that's going to be a really cool dialogue and discussion for us all to have as an industry in the future. We also need to work on this process and perception issue. We've got to figure out designing efficiently, adding value, and showing how we're adding value. Beyond this, it's going to take a big shift in mindset for people to get on board with this, because there's that weird question of what are your values, right? And then I think that for our profession, if we move in this direction, we can make a huge impact. So good luck out there. I believe in you. Okay. Thank you.